Hello and welcome to Teaching My Cat to Read, the very serious book review podcast. I'm Eli.
I'm Em.
And I'm Lottie. And this week we're discussing everything about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
Love the jingle.
No author listed here because we do not have an author.
No, it is.
I did very much
authorless.
enjoy how much the Wikipedia article kept switching between either they can't decide whether they want to call him the Gawain poet or the Pearl poet.
Yeah,
which I think probably tells you more about the academic than the actual author.
I personally hadn't read this before. Like, do one of you want to give, I guess, a introduction to, say, Arthurian poems and kind of, well, how this fits in the wider scope of things? Because I guess, like, for my example, my knowledge of Arthurian legend is the BBC TV show Merlin, the Disney film, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So
I mean, those are the best. Those are the best bits, really. You don't really need any.
What else do you need? You go to university to study this
this
stuff, and that's just what they do is they put you down in front of that.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have very much jumped in at the. I have read this before, but not for my degree, because my degree in the sort of is Old English, most of my stuff. So,
so
this is Middle
English.
English, which is a completely different thing. That's a lie. It's not that completely different, but it's different enough that
it's closer to what people think of. Like, it's what people think of Old English as being. It's like, you can basically just read it. It's just a bit funny. It's like, no. That's Middle English. Old English is a different language.
But
this is Middle English.
This is the language of Chaucer. We are in Chaucer times.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of where it fits in, sort of Arthurian wise, once again, there is a big gap in my knowledge. I can take you from the earliest reference to Arthur to about 1170 ish. So about 100, 200 years before this poem was written. And I don't know what happens in that gap.
Yeah.
There is a gap. I mean, I guess it's one of those topics that it's based a lot in, I guess, history. This is a poem that, according to, and I'm going to reference the Wikipedia page, which is a well-known resource for resourcing stuff. It says, written in the stanzas of alliterative verse, each of which ends in a rhyming bob and wheel, it draws on Welsh, Irish and English stories, as well as the French chivalric tradition. It is an important example of a chivalric romance, which typically involves a hero who goes on a quest which tests his prowess. Shall we talk about Sir Gawain's test?
It's this very stupid quest.
So he gets double dog dared me by an eldritch abomination to go and die, basically.
Yeah.
What happens?
And I mean, who hasn't been there? I mean, who isn't just hasn't been sitting down to Christmas dinner at some point and had a random giant green man turn up and be like, hey, you want to chop my head off? I'll chop your head off too. And gone, yeah, all right, sounds like a good time. We've all been there.
That is my understanding of what Christmas is like.
There's the universal experience, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say that brings me to what my terrible summary of this poem was going to be, which is that the Gawain poet cordially informs us all that the Green Knight can get it, actually. Like, there was a whole verse of just, look at how big his thighs are. Look at how perfect his waist is. It doesn't matter that he's entirely green. He's hot as...
And then he shows up later as a different character. And you are, again, the point is belabored about how much this character can also get it, and his wife.
Yeah. His wife can also get it.
It's a lot.
It's slightly odd. I mean, coming from someone who, again, my only experience of medievalist literature is Beowulf, which is a completely different time, place, and setting. Yeah, it was a journey. I feel that's. I think my terrible summary. I guess it's a less terrible summary, but if you would like a decent audiobook, the one that is on Audible, I think it's by Terry Jones, which does the Tolkien translation. I really enjoyed it because it kept the poem and the alliterative language, so it had a lot of alliteration in it, and etc. etc. But it also had a really handy introduction.
I have a thing about that.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the Tolkien one is going to have a good introduction because he's the dude.
Yeah, so that was quite nice for me knowing nothing. It set the scene quite well.
Yeah. No,
so the thing about the alliteration is that I read the Simon Armitage translation, which Em lent to me, and he has a foreword which talks about how this is an alliterative poem, and he has this great phrase where he says that the alliteration is like the warp and weft of the poem, like the back and forth of weaving fabric together, and without it you just have threads. And I thought, wow, that's a really beautiful image that you've just conjured here. I love to see the word weft used in anything modern. And then I actually read his translation, and the alliteration was so forced in places and so sort of stilted. And I was like, I understand that you are doing this as an artistic choice, that you've chosen to prioritize alliteration over tonal consistency, but I hate it.
I've got to say, I do really like this translation. This is it's the only one I've read, actually. So I've not got anything to compare it to, but I do really enjoy it. And most of the time, I enjoy the alliteration. But I do not disagree. There are moments where I got thrown completely out of the narrative by just a word choice where I was just going, this doesn't actually make sense. The actual sense of this line has been lost utterly because you were so desperate to preserve the alliteration. And I've got to say, at that point, you just got to let it go, my guy. You just got to let it go.
I've been saying to Em that what it reminded me of in places was the way that... So I write cryptic crosswords as part of my job, bizarrely enough, as someone who works in tech. And when you write cryptic clues, you're often constrained, like, I want this word to have this many letters in it. I need these things to anagram to a certain thing or whatever. And you end up coming up with these really contrived sentences. And that's okay because that's in the world of cryptic crosswords. But that reminded me of... I was reminded of that during the reading of this translation. And again, I realised it's an artistic choice. It's not like there's a reason that that's happening, and it's not because he's a bad writer. It's just I didn't like it. It wasn't for me. But the story itself...
I think it is a sign of a bad writer when you're sacrificing meaning to style in that way. Like, I think if it's going to throw the audience out that much, if you are really having to sacrifice meaning I think you've got to be able to let it go. You've got to be able to let it go. Yeah. But that's just me. That's just my take on the I wonder if I'd feel differently about it if I was actually somebody who could read Middle English, because I definitely had stronger opinions about Beowulf translations.
Yeah, I sort of wanted to... I want to go and get the Middle English and see if I can read it. Or, obviously I have to look up a lot of stuff.
Well, I mean,
but there will be lines where it's like you just read it out as you think it ought to be said, and suddenly it's like, oh, I do actually know what this says.
And I think from what the Wikipedia article was saying, again, I'm doing all my research on Wikipedia because I'm a very good medievalist. The Tolkien edition, which I think is from 1925, is one of the editions where they keep a running glossary on the same page. So
I love Tolkien.
You can read.
He was the
along, basically. Yeah. Which is, I mean, that's the way they do Beowulf. That's the way they teach us Beowulf, is you get the edition with the on-page glossary and notes. And that is I think it's a very useful way of doing it.
So when you buy that, because of who you are as a person, I will steal it from you and read that.
It's on my list. I was planning to go to the secondhand bookshop because they are sufficiently nerdy that I saw 3 separate editions of De Excidio Britanniae in there the last time I was there. And I'm like, this is a kind of place that would have multiple editions of Gawain and the Green Knight, isn't it? So that's on my quest list. I'm going to write a great chivalric romance about my deep quest to the secondhand bookshop for nerd purposes.
Yeah, like I definitely think I mean I really enjoyed the audiobook, the Tolkien audiobook. It, like again I said, for the introduction, but also because it's nice to hear the rhythm of the poem. Yeah. I think like out loud, and especially with the alliteration, it sounded almost like, I made a note, like it sounded like a tongue twister. But it did kind of create this very evocative environment that, with that context that Tolkien provided, like in the first bit, because the actual poem itself is relatively short. I looked at the audiobook and it said it was like 4.5 hours. I was like, oh my god, this is a really long poem. And actually most of that, like a good hour of that, is just the introduction, which ironically is, as I'm also listening to Lord of the Rings, an audiobook, the prologue to Lord of the Rings, it sounded exactly the same. I'm like, oh, I get why he did this in Lord of the Rings now.
This is really one of my favourite things about being a medievalist is when you get to read some Tolkien literary criticism, and it's like Gandalf is explaining Beowulf to you. He sounds exactly the same.
It's exactly the same. It made it so much more accessible. I think if you haven't like read anything or listened to anything like this before, so yeah, I definitely recommend it. I think some people, on the rating, some people like don't like the narrator, but I personally thought it was good. So I'd give it a shot.
That's the way you want to. Now that audiobooks are such a thing, that is the way you want to hear it, really, because it would have been. You don't bother making a poem this alliterative and have this much rhythm and rhyme to it if you're not expecting people to read it out loud.
I mean, I that's how I read it. I sat down, I went out to the park and sat down with this book. And I only made it about like 5-10 minutes in of reading out loud to myself, but that was how I started.
Yeah.
And I did the same with Beowulf, actually. And for that, when we read it, I did the Tolkien translation. And I definitely prefer Beowulf for it. But that's probably the Tolkien aspect. I think if I go and read the Tolkien translation of Sir Gawain, I think I'll probably like that a lot more in its wording. Yeah, but I guess we've sort of been talking about like the wording of the translations. Do we want to talk about the story and what actually goes on in the story?
I mean, I think that makes for a nice linking bit, in that one of the things I was going to say that actually this reminded me of the Seamus Heaney Beowulf was how much it being a poem kind of carries you on through the story. Like, it's got pace to it, you know? There's a lot of... So this is another thing about, like, prose Arthuriana and a lot of other sort of Arthurian texts that I am familiar with, is there's always a bit where your brain goes, why the am I here? You know, there's always a bit where you're like, oh, we're listing 120 different people who were members of Arthur's court at one point. Okay, my brain's noped out of this. Oh, what's that? There's another knight at a ford who won't reveal his name, and so you have to fight him, and then it turns out he's your twin brother. Like, you get bored. You get so bored, and you skip so much. This is not the case with this poem. You do just get really carried along in the narrative, or at least I found it that.
No, I totally agree.
That was my experience.
I definitely think the poem aspect, and again, an audiobook definitely helped follow it through. Like the rhythm of it, you could keep up with the language of it, and the pace of it, and the story, because I think for Beowulf, I read my brain's had a complete blank.
Was it the Maria de Van
Yes,
Hedding?
It was. That's the one.
Yeah,
that's the one.
Yeah.
And I thought that was great to read because it was more modern in its translation, in the language, and so I found that quite easy to follow in the written form, whereas this much easier to follow, but also I think having the context of the chivalric is how you pronounce it?
Yeah, that's how you
chivalric
pronounce it,
chivalric. What are words in English? Who made this language?
And we can blame the French for that.
Yeah, we can literally blame the French, because actually, if you go on the thing for Middle English, it was literally English language that was spoken after the Norman Contest of 1066 until the late 15th century. So we can literally blame the French.
And for chivalry specifically, because it's literally the rules to do with people who have horses or cheval.
Yeah.
So that is a fun fact I've just learned.
People rules. This is the code of the girls who are feral about horses when you're about 8. Or it should be.
Yeah.
Bring that back. Bring that back. Well, no, horse girls should be following the chivalric code and honouring their lord, and I
wonder what the pipeline of horse girls to butch lesbians is. If you're going to be chivalric.
Yeah. I don't know. This is a thing where I'm sort of I have this vague antipathy towards horse girls from I don't know, something in my childhood about growing up around horse girls and not having the money to be a horse girl, and just being deeply resentful of this as a nonsense. So I mean, and I love butch lesbians. So I'm sort of I can't that pipeline in my brain is
no,
just
it
like,
was a
that
very
can't be right.
tenuous link with the whole, like, you know that poem about the I was a tiny knight, like holding somebody's hand by the campfire. Yeah. Sorry, way off tangent here.
Would
we
you
were
guys
about the chivalric code?
Yeah, I was going to say, I've just found the 10 Commandments of Chivalry, but compiled by historian Leon Gautier in 1891. Okay, thou shalt believe that the church teaches, and thou shalt observe all its directions. Right. Thou shalt defend the church. Thou shalt respect weakness, and shalt constitute thyself the defender of them. Thou shalt love the country in which thou wast born. Thou shalt not recoil before thine enemy. So basically, don't be a wimp. Thou shalt make war against the infidel without cessation and without mercy. That's gross. Thou shalt perform scrupulously thy feudal duties, if they be not contrary to the laws of God. Thou shalt never lie, and shalt remain faithful to thy pledged word. Which, to be fair, that's a key one in this poem.
Yeah, that is the one that's the most important. Actually, I wanted to talk with Eli about that, because I thought it was kind of an interesting thinking about promises that you make that just make your life harder. And thinking about sort of the Jewish kind of contract, the contract with God of this, the being the chosen people just means more work. It doesn't make your life easier, and some of the rules.
It's not chosen for more ice cream. It's chosen to do the dishes. Yeah. Interesting. So, one of the things that I think about with Gawain taking on this challenge, right, is that the reason he does it is because he's like, because Arthur's got to do it, and there's this whole thing where the Green Knight has turned up and he's gone, okay, does anybody want to die, basically. And then none of them do, and he calls them all a bunch of cowards. So Arthur stands up and is like, okay, I guess I will have to do this because I do not want the reputation of my hall to be in question.
Yeah.
And Gawain is like, well, better me than you. If I weren't your nephew, there'd be nothing special about me. And that's why he ends up with this burden and this this commitment. And it's not because, so why he makes that choice is sort of, it's interesting. Like, does he really have low self-esteem? Is it because it's what he's expected to do? Does he just love Arthur that much?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one because that actually ties back quite neatly to sort of early Arthurian stuff. I reread Cilwch and Olwen for this, which is the earliest Welsh prose Arthur story. Mm-hmm. And even for it's the earliest, and it's also the only one where Arthur really does anything. Like,
instead of just being the figurehead.
Yeah, or almost a setting. He's a setting in the later ones. Yeah. And in Cilwch and Olwen, Cilwch turns up at Arthur's court, essentially in the same position as the Green Knight, weirdly enough. He even rides his horse into the hall in an uncouth fashion in the same way. He's not supernaturally one colour or anything, but, rides in and is like, hey, give me a present, or I will tell everybody that you're a shameful weenie. And Arthur's like, you seem like, once again, you seem too handsome to be lying. You're probably related to me, right? And the guy's like, yeah, sure. And he's like, okay, give me a present. But the present ends up involving a series of really ridiculous, supposedly impossible challenges that Arthur does actually involve himself in solving. And they're actually a lot easier to solve because Arthur's getting involved. Later, it's always Arthur's knights. Arthur's knights are the ones that have to defend sort of the honour of Arthur's court. You never see Arthur riding out on adventures. It's always, Owain, go... actually, why does Owain go? I don't remember. Never mind. It's
goes
always,
somewhere.
Hey, good Sir Knight, go solve this problem out there for us. Yeah. Otherwise, it will shame Arthur's court.
Previously, Merlin really didn't reflect. Arthur was always doing it in that
Yes,
series.
That's a very, very uncharacteristic.
Royals who actually do something, Yeah,
but by the time you get to the later stories, Arthur is more of a setting than he is a character, often.
Is Merlin around at the time of this story, or is it not really clear? Because he does get mentioned.
Yeah, he does get mentioned.
At the end.
Yeah, I mean, from what I remember, it sounds like he's in his tree phase.
Tree phase.
There's a bit where he spurns a young witch or is in love with a young witch and she's like, haha, joke's on you, and then puts him in a tree. And that's a whole thing.
I love that. I'm calling into work. Sorry, I can't come into work today. I'm in my tree phase.
So in terms of Gawain's, I guess, quest, it's three different quests he has to achieve. She says, frantically trying to remember if it was 3 or 4.
It's the he specifically has to keep his word to the Green Knight about coming to get his head chopped off.
He has to go seek out the Green Chapel. It has to be before New Year's Day of the next year, and he has to willingly receive the same blow, or a blow. So one of the things that is sometimes like that I had in my head about this story is that the Green Knight is like, whatever blow you deal me, I will deal back to you. And so I've always been like, oh, why not just give him a little kiss on the cheek? You know, why would you go for the kill?
There's a porn version of this where the blow that they go for is completely different.
Well, exactly. But in the actual text, it's not that. It's just it is you hit me as hard as you can, and I will hit you. There's nothing to be gained by pulling back at the beginning. There's nothing to be gained by not hitting him full force, because that's what he's going to do to you anyway, even if you give him a little smooch on the cheek. Yeah.
And specific as well, it's given that the challenge is kind of to be like, hey, Arthur's court is a bunch of weenies. You can't just then be like, oh, I've trimmed like your hair.
Like when I said double dog dare, I mean, it really is. It's like he's come along, insulted all of their masculinity and virtue and all of that chivalric.
And Arthur's hangry as well. And let's not forget that. Arthur's not allowed to eat until something cool happens, which I had completely forgotten about. So Arthur's like sitting there like seething, like when's somebody going to tell a cool story or win a cool game so I can eat? And then this green guy walks in and is like, sup.
God, imagine that, but it's like Monopoly. You have to win Monopoly before you can eat. Like, that's the modern Christmas equivalent.
I was going to say, this is not that different from your average Christmas family game afternoon, in that, you know, there is a lot of violence and nobody's happy about it, and we'd all much rather be eating. It's going to have consequences next Christmas because people will still be bearing grudges.
Next year you have to go to someone else's house and do it all over again. Yeah.
But yeah, so there's the quest that specifically that he promised the Green Knight in the game. There is the game that he's playing with the Lord of the Castle, who's totally not the Green Knight. Definitely not. 100%. He's just hot in exactly the same way the Green Knight is without being green. It's cool. Don't worry about it.
And his hot wife, he goes to their castle and there are these beautiful people who are just like, yo, we think you're absolutely great. Just come and like hang out in our castle and we're both going to flirt with you incessantly. And Gawain is like, I am too chivalrous to be your third. It pains me, but I cannot. And I'm sitting there like, this would be solved. What do you think would have happened if, I guess part of what happens in the end is that Gawain does not give in to the ladies' advances, and he maintains his chivalry, and this is good for him in the end. But I'm sort of going like, I wouldn't blame him.
It was interesting to me because I was kind of sitting through this going, okay, he doesn't seem bothered by the idea of cuckolding this friend that has, you know, generously lent him his castle for Christmas. Like, that doesn't seem to enter his brain at all. And the poet also doesn't seem to be... I think there's actually a line where he says no evil in either of them. Like, it's totally okay for her to be trying to seduce him, and for him to be enjoying it, but not actively going, let's
well, it's interesting as well because she is actually also her own character more than I expected. Or at least Gawain treats her like a person. He's like, I don't want to hurt her feelings by turning her down completely, so I'll accept a kiss. And it talks about them being friends, which I was actually kind of surprised by. It's not an adversarial thing at all. It's a game that they're playing almost.
Yeah, and they do seem to be genuinely having fun with it. There's a couple of moments where I'm sort of like, oh, this is a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, like, I agree.
Yeah.
But until he's actively like, oh god, I'm gonna die tomorrow. They seem pretty chill about the whole thing. But one of the things I was reading in the Wikipedia article is apparently the chivalric code here of, you know, be honest with and keep your word, i.e. give your current host anything you find in the castle during the day.
Yeah.
Is in conflict with the code of courtly love, which I kind of assumed they were the same thing, but apparently they're not. Where you're literally not allowed to refuse anything a woman asks you.
That's deeply unsettling.
That sounds very problematic. So
Yeah. And this is the thing that I had no context for, and it does explain why if he's so into her, and he doesn't seem to be bothered about the cheating, and he's not really bothered by having to kiss Bertilac either. He's just like, yeah, this is fine. Nope. So you kind of go, he's probably, the fact that he doesn't ever go, I can't sleep with this woman because if I sleep with her, I'm going to have to sleep with her husband. The fact that that's not a consideration at all. You kind of, as a modern audience, you're sitting there going, so why aren't you?
Yeah.
You know?
You're clearly into both of them. Like, why not? And it's because he's got the whole, like... Actually, I don't know what in his rules prevents him from just going along with it. Like, why is it more chivalrous to not sleep with her?
Well, I think it was... the issue was he's on the one hand, if he's cuckolding the husband, so that's bad, versus the woman's advances, which by his code he has to accept his code, but also be respectful of the person who's put him up basically for Christmas.
Yeah, and I guess this is maybe one of the things where like we're maybe coming at it from a modern, relationship anarchy has been invented at this point. And as a medieval audience, you're looking at it going, I know the givens here, and the givens are obviously he can't
do this.
Betray his friendship with the Lord by sleeping with the Lord's wife.
I was quite surprised,
and he also can't tell the Lord that
so he can't. He can't he can't lie to he can't tell the Lord, because then he'd be.
We'd be snitching on her.
Snitching on the wife.
That feels unchivalric.
But I was quite surprised, actually, even the Tolkien translation, like quite how forward she was. Like, I assumed that it would be very, very implied.
Yeah.
Let's go sleep together.
She's fully like, lay down with me.
It's like, lay down with me in this bed right here as I like take my dress off, and I'm sitting there going, what? Like,
yeah.
I wasn't expecting that in a medieval poem. I don't know. Like, I guess I was quite surprised by that.
So I guess the situation here is like they are knowingly putting him in an impossible situation to see how he deals.
Yeah,
and it's like this extra game on top of him also having agreed to get his head chopped off by this guy in a year's time. It feels a little bit mean.
It does feel a little bit mean. And I think that actually... So one of the things that really struck me going to the ending was kind of... Okay, so Gawain's had a really nice time with this Lord and Lady. He doesn't seem particularly bothered by the game. He's mostly bothered by that I would like to not have my head chopped off. And so the Green Knight, Bertilac, no longer green, invites him after they've done the whole I pretend to chop your head off 3 times... and reveal all of my secrets thing. Bertilac invites him back to the castle and is like, we all love you there, and no one more than me. I think this is quite literally what the translation I have says.
Yes.
And Gawain is like so embarrassed and so upset that he's like, actually, I don't want to. No, I have to go right now immediately.
To be clear, what he's upset by is not like having been deceived or anything. It's because on the last day, the lady offers him a girdle that she says will protect him from any harm, and he takes it and he does not give it to the Lord per the rules of their game. So he cheats on their game and lies, and it doesn't even work, right? Because he does get his neck cut by the axe at the end, even though he's wearing the girdle. So it was his failure there was all for nothing. And he's so ashamed of this, like, essentially minor transgression that he's immediately absolved of by the Green Knight.
Yeah, see, that's the thing.
But it was this really interesting thing to me where it's like he can't forgive himself.
Yeah. And to me, that's what I was thinking about. I was trying to resolve that with myself, because I was kind of sitting there like, okay, it is kind of embarrassing. But also, he literally said it's fine, and it's understandable that you would, like, want to not die. And... it's a very minor transgression in the scheme of things. All is well.
Like, so not sleeping with my wife was a much greater test of strength. Or strength of will.
And then, so for Gawain to be that upset, I'm wondering if it's a bit more like he has suddenly realised maybe they weren't that into me. Maybe all these people that I've spent Christmas with who've been so friendly and so kind and... who he's for the most part seems to have had a really good time with, genuinely enjoying their company and finding them to be good friends.
And that in concert with the whole, like...
all of that was a trick. Maybe all of that was them trying to test him. Maybe none of that was real. And the fact that Bertilac is the Green Knight and he didn't know, like, that is really upsetting, actually.
Yeah.
That is like, okay, that is really embarrassing. I wouldn't necessarily want to go back to the castle in that situation, you know?
Yeah, and then I'm thinking about at the beginning where it's like he takes on this quest because he's like, well, better me to die than anyone else here.
Yeah.
Like, this boy has low self-worth.
Yeah.
Like, that would hit extra hard. You know, he's gone out on this adventure, which I think is like his first adventure. Like, he's unproven, he's not proven himself yet. And he's had this great time, and then he sort of goes, oh God, I have no idea what actually happened here. And just kind of wants to run back home, where he may not be happy either, but like, he gets back home, and my sort of vibe was that the rest of them didn't really understand what had happened to him, and that he was still wearing this girdle, like, to remind himself of his own failing, and the fact that, you know, even when he was trying his hardest, he still failed, which is just like, man, you need some therapy. Yeah. And the other knights all, like, start wearing a green girdle in the same way as, like, a sash. I'm like, it doesn't strike me as the reaction of people who've understood what he's doing and why he's doing it.
Yeah, it doesn't strike me as a reaction.
It's sad for him.
Yeah, it might have been a sort of like, actually, we're trying to change this symbol. Like, you're clearly upset about it, so we're trying to be with you in this. We're trying to be supportive and also to change the meaning of the symbol a bit to, like, remind us that, you know, no matter how hard we try, we're gonna f up sometimes, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But it could equally mean that they don't. Yeah, that they've kind of gone, oh, it wasn't that big a deal. Like, don't sweat it.
Yeah, whereas Gawain feels like he's
really cruel.
Even though he's survived this impossible quest, he feels like he's failed.
Yeah, and, like, to have that rubbed in your face, even by, you know, in the kindest reading, some well-meaning members of your family and your social group. That's like, yeah, man, it sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why, in my head, what actually happens is, you know, like, he does go back to the castle, and they all just have a nice orgy and solve everything. Yeah. Like, 3-way marriage. Whoop.
I mean, him at the end very much resonated with me as a perfectionist, where I'm like, I can do so well on something, but if I get one thing wrong, that is what I will fixate on. Yeah. And I'll go back and be like, you know, it rang true to me.
Yeah, I think the thing for me that maybe got it, when I started reading it the way I was talking about earlier, with the kind of, maybe none of these people actually like me, that was the bit where I was like, okay, because that's the bit that really struck, because it was like, I don't know, you ever get in a situation where you think you've understood what's going on, and then you get out of it and you're like, oh, maybe that actually wasn't what was going on.
Yeah, like, you reflect on it a lot later.
Sorry, listeners, we've experienced some technical difficulties, but it's very important to me that we come back from them with this immediate question. What do you think would have changed if Gawain had taken up first the lady and then the lord upon the offer of the sex? Because honestly, I think that's, like, yeah, I'm curious. I'm interested. And not just because I'm a horrible bisexual who wants to solve everything with polyamory, but mostly because, listen, it's Pride Month. I can solve everything with polyamory if I want to.
Well, he probably would have died, right? Realistically, he would have died.
Well, if he sleeps with both of them, is it any? The thing is, if he had actually taken the lady up on the offer and told the husband, would he? Yeah. Because he'd be keeping his argument, right?
He hasn't been telling him where the kisses have come from before, so it's possible that he would be like, yeah, no, hey, come into my room a sec, and then just not had sex with him and not explained why, or how that was a thing that he'd gotten in the castle. He'd just be like, yeah, don't know what to tell you, sometimes that just happens.
Do you think the knight would have respected him more if he had had sex with him and not told him why? Like, specifically keeping the confidence. Because obviously he doesn't need to be told. He knows what's going on.
Yeah,
but the whole, like, when he Gawain doesn't tell him where he got the kisses from, the knight seems to think that's very funny. And
I mean, if we're thinking about it, that is like passing the test with flying colours in a way, isn't it? Because it's resolving the tension between he's got to do what he can't refuse a reasonable request from a lady, but he also can't get her in trouble. He can't break his word to the husband, and he also can't get her in trouble for having kissed him, because that would be rude.
Yep.
So he's actually resolved it as neatly as he can by kissing Bertilac and not telling him why.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, like, there's the dimension that I always forget about, which is that specifically that the Green Knight game is Morgan Le Fay's idea. So it's not Bertilac's idea. He didn't just wake up one morning and was like, "Hey, you know what would be really fun if I was giant and green and had my head chopped off." Like, there was a proven enemy of Camelot out there who's like, "You know what would be really funny is if Guinevere died of fright on Christmas," and this was her convoluted way of like.
I mean, that's such a convoluted way of like. So Morgan Le Fay is effectively Morgana, right? If we're going to the BBC Merlin adaptation of Who's Who, and like, if you want to kill Guinevere, like, why? Yeah, it seems like a really convoluted method, because you also have to guarantee that. Gawain is going to die. Well, I assume, like, is Gawain the one who... Is he the one who is, like, meant to be involved with Guinevere, or is it someone else?
No, that's Lancelot.
That's Lancelot, okay. So, like, again, so why is Gawain dying going to make her die of fright?
Yeah, because it's almost... It feels like that's... Like, if the goal is Guinevere's death, right, then the game is almost irrelevant.
Yeah, that's what I think.
He's just expecting her to, like, keel over from fright at the sight of a big green dude getting his head chopped off.
I thought it was the thought of the big green dude getting to chop Arthur's head off.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
And Gawain
that makes more
steps
sense.
in.
Yeah.
But still, like...
So she wasn't expecting... I tell you what, and that would kind of track with... Because Gawain is Morgana's nephew.
Yes.
So, like, presumably she wouldn't... I don't know anything about their relationship in Arthurian canon, but... presumably, she wouldn't have been like, "Oh, sister's son, I can just off him," right? She wouldn't have been like, she would have gotten in trouble for that, we assume. So, so maybe she wasn't expecting any of the other knights to pick up on it. Yeah, there's a novel retelling in there where Gawain is like, "Yeah, sure, why not? Free love." And then wakes up the next morning to Bertilac and the lady, like, panicking about how they're gonna, like, resolve this curse from Morgan Le Fay they're like, "Wait, so we didn't actually plan for if he took us up on it. Does that mean we have to chop his head off? I don't want to chop his head off. Am I going to be staying big and green forever if I don't chop his head off?"
So yeah, and it's like kind of like that would also be a really, I don't know if there is a sort of point of view from that perspective of him getting cursed to be the giant green man, having to go through with this, having to then tell the wife what she needs to then seduce Sir Gawain, which she also has to go along with, because in the poem, like, she's quite forward about this, like I'd said. So from Gawain's point of view, it's like, oh no, she really clearly really wants me. Whereas actually, one could argue, well, is she just doing it so her husband gets this weird ass curse taken off him? Like, it's an interesting point of view if you consider it from that way, because then, I don't know, I guess it's not really an unreliable narrator, but I don't know, it's not really from Gawain's point of view.
A narrator with a very specific viewpoint.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting. This was a thing that, so the earlier comparison I have for this isn't an Arthurian story, but it's a Welsh prose story in which a guy whose name means sense, which is clearly ironic from the contents of the story, gets in trouble with the local king of Faerie and is like, okay, so in order to, like, not have war everlasting between our two realms, we're going to swap places for a year. That's the bargain that we've struck. And we're going to look like each other and we'll run each other's kingdoms, and at the end of the year we'll come back.
Yeah.
And part of that deal is that Pwyll is allowed to sleep with this guy's wife, But he doesn't. He spent the whole year, he ends up being really good friends with this guy's wife, kind of like Gawain and this lady. You know, they get on really well. He's actually pretty decent at running this kingdom, surprising literally everybody who's ever met original dude. And then, yeah, he gets back and the King of Fairies like, hey, so how was he? And she's like, I don't know what you mean. And he's like, well, how was he in bed? And she's like, he never slept with me. And he's like, he what? And it's like, it's clearly like he doesn't expect the guy not to have slept with his wife. The very
offended on her behalf. It's like, no, babe, I promise you're still really hot and really attractive, and I bet he's totally into you.
yeah. It's just like, yeah, and did he tell the wife beforehand that was going to happen, or did she just not know and assume her husband had decided he wasn't into her anymore for a whole year? Like, that's some fucked up shit there. But yeah, I think the only way for this poem to still be fun is if the lady is as into Gawain as she's saying he is. Otherwise, this all becomes extremely dark and creepy and not a good time.
Yes.
Which I think is kind of where the adaptation takes it a little bit.
I haven't seen it, so what did you guys think of it compared to the poem?
I mean, it's interesting.
It's weird. It's really weird. So it focuses more on, there's like those 3 throwaway lines in the beginning about, he went on an adventure like from All Saints Day, and he fought things and he had adventures, blah blah blah. Yeah. And then it picks up again when he sees the Green Knight's castle, and it expands on those few lines and shows you a lot of like what might have happened in that time.
Yeah.
And so it mentions giants. You see the giants.
Yeah. And yeah, that's like most of the film, and in the poem, that's not really anything, which is kind of interesting. But the other thing I was going to say specifically about this scene, the bit that I disagreed with the most in the adaptation was also the bit where I go, okay, they actually went, okay, this whole courtly love, he can't refuse her thing has potential to be really creepy and f***ed up.
Yes.
And they made it about as creepy and f***ed up as you could make it, actually. Which then ends up kind of f***ing the dynamic with Bertilac later, because sort of thinking about it, I don't think in the film, I think he thought they were playing the kissing game. And this is why he kisses beautiful Dev Patel. Not that you need a reason, but, it's because he thinks his wife has been playing the kissing game. And it's why he doesn't understand why Gawain's so scared of him when he says, hey, we're doing the game. Because Gawain knows that what actually happened was a non-consensual, very creepy hand job. And so he's kind of sitting there like, oh. And the knight, thinking his wife has been playing the relatively innocent kissing game, is like, why is he so scared of me? Oh, God, what's happened? Why is he, I thought we were on the same page. Which is a very different... Yeah, I think the film basically strips off all the chivalry and all the courtly romance and is basically just like... What does it mean to keep your word? And if Gawain... It sets Gawain up as a character who refuses to ever give his word, almost. Like, he's a bit...
Yeah.
He's a bit of a slitherer outerer. Like, he avoids having honest conversations with this woman that's in love with him that he's sleeping with at a brothel. And he avoids... He seems to be avoiding his responsibilities to Camelot. He doesn't seem to particularly want to be... anything. And what the knight shows him is if he ran from the axe, he sees what would have happened if he didn't keep his word and if he didn't let the guy chop his head off. And it's that he becomes this utterly soulless, violent, careless king who ends up dying horribly and nobody really cares. And I think in some ways it is kind of a you go through weird to know yourself story still.
Okay.
It's just had all of the the extra, the sort of the stuff that we were talking about earlier that's kind of like a bit weird from a modern standpoint. There's all these extra rules and codes of conduct. And the film kind of goes, okay, there's 2 key points about this poem. 1, the outside is weird and scary and you never know what's going to happen. And 2, going on weird journeys is about knowing yourself.
Yeah.
And knowing the consequences of your actions. And it's about... Yeah, and I think that, and being forced to reckon with the fact that maybe you're a bad person.
Yeah.
And it's much more like in your face in the film that's what's happening. Forced to confront the fact that if he refuses to ever stick to anything, he's going to become the person in this vision, and it all starts.
Not to quote Hamilton, but if you stand for nothing, what will you fall for?
Yeah, absolutely. And it turns out what he'll fall for is awful and a waste, and just generally quite terrible. And I don't know. I want to rewatch it now. I think it makes a lot more. The film makes a lot more sense to me having reread the poem recently, which I wasn't expecting to happen, actually. But it's an interesting take on it, and it's a different take on Gawain, because the poem is very much like, even though maybe he hasn't done very much and he's the least of Arthur's knights and whatever, everybody still thinks he's a good dude. Everybody. There's a verse where the guys at Bertilac's castle are like, oh, that's so cool that Gawain's going to hear. We need to watch him really closely and learn everything. Maybe we'll even get to learn how to flirt from big bro Gawain, And it's clear that, there's a lot of admiration and this sort of expectation that he's already a good guy. And the film does not take that for granted at all.
Yeah, I think what's funny is because I also realised that in the Wheel of Time, because everybody is the names are very Arthurian legend heavy.
Yeah.
That I pronounce it as Gawain because that's how it's Gawayn. I said it's Gawain, and then I realised in the back of it, it's oh, it's Gawain. Oh, because he's meant to be Gawain. Oh, this makes sense. And it's kind of this guy who's very, very stickler for the rules, and he sort of follows his opinion to the letter to a fault. Which I thought is quite interesting, having this, because it is kind of, when I think about that book and his story arc, which I'm not going to spoil obviously, but it does kind of lie with that position of being having this rule set that he's going for because of basically a snap decision from false information he's based this decision off, and he follows it to an absolute fault. So it was quite interesting having the story from Sir Gawain. Also, fun fact that in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Sir Gawain is the one who goes after Sir Bors to avenge Bors' death with a killer rabbit. He also dies, but he's the one with little fish on his front. I thought that's that's really cute fun fact, because I was like, oh, who's Gawain in Holy Grail? And it's he's just the guy who dies by the killer rabbit.
He gets 5 seconds in the sun.
Yeah.
Here's a thought I am having. What does it mean to be an individual, to be a person, when you have to live by these rules that are so constrained? Gawain never really has choices, right? Throughout this entire thing, the only choice he makes is to put himself forward. And from then on, all of his actions are basically dictated by what's the correct and courtly thing to do.
Yeah. And actually...
Is that a thing? What...
Yeah.
Who actually is he outside of living by these codes?
And that's something I was thinking about when Lottie was talking about the personality of the Wheel of Time character. And I was thinking... This is the thing about Gawain in this poem, to me at least, seems to be that there's a lot of stuff about how, he's the paragon of all the 5 virtues, and he's beyond reproach. And by modern literary standards, none of that constitutes a personality, really.
Yeah.
None of that tells you why you should care about him. And I do in this poem. I do care about him. But it's not to do with any of his actual listed qualities.
Yeah, because the most you get is he's a really good Christian. He really cares about the 5 qualities of Christ or whatever, and that's the 5 wounds of Christ on the cross, because you have the hands, the feet, and the spear piercing, and it's this is all well and good, but who is he? Good pious Christian isn't a personality.
Yeah, and I think what we get from the story is a guy who's pretty friendly, a guy who's rolls with the punches quite a lot.
Yeah.
A guy who thinks his life isn't worth as much maybe as the people's around him. And a guy who sees a cave and goes, well, obviously Satan lives there. I think the god bothering is compared to some medieval texts, the god bothering in this poem is pretty limited.
It's fairly mild. Yeah.
It's mild.
He gets to this cave and he's like, well, there's clearly demons in there. That.
Absolutely not.
And that kind of
in some places, the vibes are just rancid. Sometimes that's what it's like. You go there and you go, look, I've had that experience. I'm not even a Christian, and sometimes I go to a place and I'm just I think this place needs an exorcism.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually. That was one of the places where it most reminded me of Beowulf, actually. I hate
something like, here is a feature of the natural world that's clearly, like, supernatural.
Yeah.
And I think
and that's just kind of normal.
Yeah. And also, like, the intensity of the scenery. Like, I don't know about you, but I really felt like there were bits where they were doing, they were doing the nature poem bit, or they were describing his route or the countryside that he was walking through, and, particularly the trip to the Green Chapel. And I really felt like I was there. Like, it was that level of description. And I definitely had that experience with Beowulf as well. There are bits where you're like, oh, I've been so thoroughly dragged in here. I can see the mist dripping off these leaves, And so that was kind of interesting to me as a.
I mean, one thing that I think the Dev Patel adaptation did really well was it was very evocative in scenery and like tone setting.
Yeah. It's very. Whatever you're feeling it very powerfully, and it's clear that they've done that on purpose. What are you feeling? Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I would love to see a Beowulf adaptation in that style.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that would be really interesting.
With the sort of the way that they did Arthur's court in that movie, and then you have that being Hrothgar. Like, it'd be really cool.
Yeah. I think that could be really cool. I was thinking about the Beowulf connection again, like thinking about the restrictions of codes, because one of the things that Beowulf is about for me is the limits of the Germanic heroic. It's like, how does this revenge thing actually work? How do we keep ending up in these untenable situations where we can't stop killing each other? And we can't, what happens when that's pushed to the limit? And the answer is you die fighting a dragon and your people are expunged from history, Yeah. And this is maybe a thing that this also has.
What's the limit of the chivalric code?
Yeah,
and it's you end up never living your life and feeling ashamed of the ways in which you didn't live up.
And interestingly, that's one of the Wikipedia article was saying this is actually where post-colonial looks have kind of gone. Interestingly, in the because it's set so Bertilac's castle is supposedly so close to Wales, and there's this sort of outside of the sense that the Camelot is flawed and possibly doomed, given how much they bring up the fall of Troy. The sort of what lives on the outskirts, and is it better? What happens when you take the codes of this very restricted society that that lives by conquest, and then you go outside of that, and does that work? What are the limits of that? Yes. Anyway, we have delved into the serious business shit. I'm much more interested in it as a queer narrative, but that's just because that's my usual.
It really is. I cannot overstate how much I was sitting there reading this and going, "Holy shit, they really do just want him to be their third." They really are we have this beautiful man in our castle, and goddamn if we aren't going to keep him. Yeah. And maybe that's the real tragedy, is that they don't get to.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm very much rooting for him to go home with them when he's all embarrassed and no, I have to leave. Very much rooting. Yeah. I'm going to send you some fanfic, Eli. I'm going to send you some fanfic.
Do it. I need cheering up after our technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Guys, who is mansplain, who is manipulating, who's male wife? Because I think this is a key question.
Male wife.
Yeah, Gawain is absolutely male wife.
I think
Morgan Le Fay is manipulate.
Yeah, actually, absolutely.
I don't know if we've got a mansplain.
I don't think we do.
No, we don't. We are out of mansplains.
Oh my God, a rare mansplainless. Narrative.
No, I'm thinking that the servant that's hey, don't go down there, you'll get killed. But that's not really mansplaining.
That's stating the obvious.
He already knows that he's going to get killed. It doesn't make that mansplaining.
Yeah.
But gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. I feel like Lady Bertilac's got to be girl boss, right?
Yeah. Who's gatekeep?
I think there was a gatekeeper mentioned at the start of the poem.
Is the
literal gatekeeper?
Chivalry is gatekeep. Chivalry is no, you can't have fun polyamorous Christmas shenanigans with a haunted lord and his wife. That's not. And then gaslight, I think, has to be. Well, it's unfortunately it probably kind of is
Bertilac and his wife.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So I have two fun questions because they're related to Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So firstly, do we think the Sir Gawain in this poem is worthy of the Holy Grenade of Antioch? Antioch.
Can he count to 3?
Can he count to
Not
3?
2,
Not
4.
5.
He's got
Five is right out.
Count on his shield, the 5 points of the symbol.
That's true. We know he can count to 3. This is a point in his favour.
Yeah, I think.
What would he have used it for?
Yeah, that's a good point. We don't.
We talk about giving people the F-bomb, but what if we gave him the hand grenade?
The hand grenade.
Gawain, what's more dangerous than Gawain? A bomb. No, Gawain with a bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think, weirdly enough, usually when we read a book for this podcast, there is a problem that you can solve by throwing a Molotov cocktail at it. Like, the Jason Mendoza school of problem solving is usually applicable. I don't think there's a single situation in this book where Gawain having a grenade would actually help.
There are scenes in the movie, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
But not in the actual original work.
To be fair,
if he had one, I think he would have chucked one in the cave when he got there. He would have been like, and then chucked the grenade in there just to clear them out.
In the actual quote of the film, it says, "O Lord, bless this thy hand grenade, that with it thou mayest blow thine enemies to tiny bits in thy mercy." Yeah. And then it's and the Lord did grin, and the people did feast upon the lambs and the sloths and the carp and the anchovies and the orangutans and the breakfast cereals and the fruit bats and the large coplers. And I'm like, okay, so is it to smite the enemies, or is it to get a really good hunt, feast situation going on? Because
where they're dropping grenades in the pond to go fishing.
Because this is at Christmas, and at Christmas you have to feed everybody in your family, their friends, and their friend's dog. So it might be necessary to get enough food for the Christmas feast.
I'm just thinking about the hunting, because the whole thing of, I've got to say, by the way, the kiss to dead meat exchange rate is terrible in this poem, because it starts out with he gets 100 deer for 1 kiss, and then it's a boar for 2 kisses, and then it's a fox for 3 kisses, and that's this seems. Yeah. The economy is shambles. Anyway,
it is the hide of a fox who's supposed to be the trickster fox, though, right? They reference Reynard the fox.
They do. I do think it's I think the kind of it's interesting to me that that's a detail that they picked up for the film, that Gawain is hanging out the fox for chunks of that.
I did not think of that. That is quite fun.
Gawain finds the holy hand grenade of Antioch in the castle, and because he found it in the castle, he has to give it to Bertilac. And then the hunt scene goes from being 5 verses to 1 line.
Yeah,
one line is boom.
Fight is nothing.
Boom.
And Bertilac's kind of "Aw." I was enjoying that.
I've also got a question of, I guess we've done the killer rabbit because he'd used the holy hand grenade of Antioch. I got Sir Gawain versus the Black Knight and Sir Gawain versus the Knights who say knee. Do you think he'd be? Would he be able to find a shrubbery? Do we think he could find a good enough shrubbery?
Oh, there's a filthy joke in there about the Lady Bertilac.
How do we think Sir Gawain feels about bushes?
Exactly. Well, then there's that, and also the fact that the Green Knight is very clearly a nature spirit, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, he could find a shrubbery. So I think he'd be all right.
The
whole thing is he doesn't.
It's the Merle High Church approach.
Oh no! Oh no! It is the nature of humanity that every now and then somebody reinvents Adventure's Own balance arc.
Specifically plant. Yeah.
Yes. I like the idea of Dev Patel Gawain versus the Black Knight, because I think it would just be so awkward.
Yeah.
Because he would. Because the thing we learned from him in the Green Knight is he would chop people's various limbs off and then be like, "Why is it still walking around?"
It's you got your arm off. It is but a scratch. I'll bite your kneecaps.
I think he'd be. I think he'd find that very, very frustrating. I think poem Gawain is probably sitting there well, one of the 5 virtues is pity, so I've probably got to be nice to you now that you don't have any limbs.
Yeah,
and Dev
basically be
Gawain is what is happening? What is happening?
Why? What is going on?
If we,
I feel like this is because of the mushrooms.
What do you think would happen if we trained an AI on all the values of courtly love and chivalric code? And could we just AI generate Gawain versus whatever?
I mean,
scenario?
ChatGPT does exist, guys. Like,
Yes, but I'm honor sworn not to use it because it steals from artists.
Yeah.
Yes.
If I built and trained my own,
Yeah.
I could have my own pet Gawain.
yeah.
And I could see what happens if I put him into various scenarios.
What happens?
We've just turned him into a Blorbo. He's just Blorbo now. We're going to put him in situations. That's all fiction
Blorbo
is.
from my Middle English poem.
Invent a man and put him in situations.
Yeah. This really is just Gawain getting put in situations, though, for like an entire poem. And that's what the movie is as well. I think that's very true to it as well.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, I think he's definitely enjoying the situations more in the poem.
Not as much as he could be. Not as much as he could be.
The poem could have a happier ending as well.
Could have a happier ending. Guys, what do we think our darling Dig Othmog, would rate this book? And if you're
She's
new...
been outside my door screaming to be let in. So I know she's interested.
So she's interested.
She has strong opinions, I feel.
I tell you what, I feel like the hunting stuff, there's a lot of violence.
There is backstabbing.
There's lying.
Because he does backstab.
And there's also, like, Gawain is basically a cat for, like, the 3 days that he's in that castle. He is just
he's just lazing around,
being dopey and being like adored by everybody,
accepting affection, but only on his terms.
Yes. Oh man, ways in which the story would have been different if Gawain had been able to just be. If it's in the courtly love code that you're allowed to bat people with claws if they're trying to seduce you too hard. Like, it's a very different poem then.
Lady Bertolet tries to rub his tummy and she just bites her.
It's a fairly high cat rating, and I'm not just saying that because I love this poem. I think like a 7.
Yeah, there's murder, there's lying, there's Gawain being like a cat for that time. There's hunting specifically, which she does love to do, even if it's only like bits of string. Yeah, I would give this an 8.
I think I agree. I think an 8.
It's also short. She has a short attention span, that cat.
Yep, yeah. This is I think she.
I reckon an 8. There are no actual cats. Otherwise, I think it would be a 9.
I
and there's
agree.
no dragons.
There aren't
either,
any dragons, which you do sometimes get in Arthurian things.
Yeah,
and have always historically bumped up the cat rating. I said that, and now I'm trying to think of a single time where I think an Arthurian person fights a dragon in my...
I mean, there is a dragon in the BBC Merlin adaptation, so...
Yeah, but he sucks. He's the worst.
But the dragon is there. The dragon is there.
He gives terrible advice and then yells at Arthur one time, and then Arthur faints and Merlin's like, bad dragon, go away.
Gawain goes to the dragon in BBC Merlin to be like, should I sleep with this incredibly attractive pair of fair folk? And the dragon is just like, that is something you must discover for yourself.
I'm going to give you no useful advice whatsoever.
He's like, is this part of your plan to kill Uther for me because he sucks? No, I don't think he's got anything to do with it. Well, then I don't care.
Yep.
Oh,
right, I think it's an 8. It's an 8 on the cat scale.
Oh, the cat rating. Guys, what else have you been reading? Quickly, briefly.
So I can read.
I have been reading all about the history of data storage for a conference talk that I just gave. Loads of really cool and weird facts that I learned that I won't share here just because otherwise I won't stop. But that's been my main thing. It's just like massive Wikipedia binges and like reading up on just like stuff from the NASA missions. Loads of really cool stuff.
I was going to say, this is the thing we didn't mention, is this is another Ashburnham house fire survivor.
Yes, it is, yes.
In one manuscript, and it was in the Cotton Library when it burned down.
Yeah. Yes, that was part of my talk. Was history of data storage includes pen and paper, and one of the ways that can go badly wrong is if it catches fire. So I got to go to a tech conference and tell lots of people about the Beowulf manuscript, which is great and weird.
It was a good time.
Oh, that's good.
I've just been spiraling. I keep sitting down and going, I don't care about Batman. I've never cared about Batman. And then I find myself somehow in the depths of AO3 reading incredibly angsty Bat Family fan fiction.
Is this because of that one content creator who does the incredible impressions of all the different people?
Maybe. Listen, I've been mixing that in. I was like, you know what? Actually, the most consistent form of DC content that I enjoy is Panda Red. So I might as well. That's been sprinkled in here. I think it was somebody wrecked a fic, and I will put it in the reference post. That is like, what if Rule 63'd one of the Robins and then did some really cool shit with it? And I was like, oh, I just want to live in this fic forever. Actually.
Rule 63 being you swap a gender assignment at birth, basically.
Yes,
right?
Yeah. So it's like Tim Drake which is the third Robin, is a woman now, and how that would have changed the story. Poison Ivy is her thesis advisor. It's great. Yeah. And that sort of spiraled, because the trouble with wanting to live in one specific very good fic is that you cannot do this. And so you go looking for something that gives you the same vibes, and sometimes it doesn't exist. Or sometimes the fandom has been around for literally ever, and there's no way you're ever going to find it.
And there's everything to read.
Needle in a haystack.
Oh, yeah, there's so much stuff. I've read so much angsty Tim Drake fanfiction this week, guys. I enjoyed it. I have not slept. It's fine. I'm in control of my life. I'm a real adult. Lottie, what are you reading?
I mean, I've got 3 books on the go at once, which I think is new record. So,
me.
I've been listening to Men at Arms. Actually, technically 4, because I've been swapping between that and Lord of the Rings. Then I read Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brand Sanderson, which is the first of his secret projects when he basically during lockdown decided I'm going to write 5 books, jokes. So I read that, and that was a good time. And I'm also reading the 3rd of the Wax and Wayne Mistborn series, which is basically like Mistborn plus like Wild West. One? Yeah, like Wild West sort of start of Industrial Revolution kind of thing. So, and it's basically like a crime novel. They're trying to find out, like in the first book, it finds out, there's a secret like evil organization, and now the evil organization has grown to wider planets other than Scadrial, which is quite exciting. So yeah, I've been reading that too, because many books is a good time. And also, I have started reading what we're going to be reading for the next episode of this podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited for this. So next week we're doing Alana, the first adventure, so the first of the Song of the Lioness quartet, which is, I'm not kidding when I say this book is my childhood. This is like, Tamora Pierce is just one of my favorite writers of all time, and I'm really, really excited for you guys to read the first.
I'm excited to read like what child M would have enjoyed. Would have enjoyed, still has enjoyed. Sounds like you stopped enjoying it. Sorry.
Oh no, I very much am still. But yeah, there's like, hey, would you like some fun stuff with gender and people getting to be knights? And there's a magic cat.
Oh, it's going to get a high cat rating then. And yeah, I'm very excited for that. And if you want to listen to our full review of that, tune in like we're radio. Download the episode, the next episode, which will be on Alana, the First Adventure. And if you enjoy this episode, please consider giving us a like or review. It means the world to us, and let us know. If you enjoyed it, you can send us an email, teachingmycattoread@gmail.com, or connect with us on all of our socials. It's all linked in the description below if you want to find any of those. So say hello, send us a message, and recommend us some books to read. Big virtual hugs, and we will see you next time.